Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, Wiam Nemu, and my guest today is Yasmine Mohammed. Hello, Yasmine.
Hello, Biam. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us because you have an amazing story and you've done so many wonderful things. You're a human rights activist and you're advocating for the rights of women living within Muslim majority countries, as well as those who struggle under religious fundamentalism in general. You're the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds, and the author of Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. So, Yasmin, you have an incredible story. I read your book, and I don't want to, the incredible part is your courage, really. I don't know that the story isn't, because the story is sad, and it's once I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. Part of that was because of your honesty. You were saying things that I didn't realize how much we as people of the Middle Eastern, the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, kind of maybe think or talk within ourselves, but don't verbalize. I don't realize that until when I was reading this, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's addressing everything. So you were waking me up, like making me aware of things that I know, but it was in my head that I thought, oh, we're aware of this, but we don't talk about it. So, what is this all about? I was learning quite a bit about ourselves, given that the community that we come from. I don't think you're of Egyptian background, but you were not born there, correct?
No, yeah, correct. I was born in Canada.
So I don't know, maybe that's where when you're born in a land where you are given that permission early on. I was born in Baghdad and I didn't leave until I was 9. And so there's still some fears and restraints that are tied when you come from that culture. And I did go to school there, so I did experience a little bit of trauma about speaking up and other things like that. So that might be the case. But I was very inspired about your honesty. And the whole time I was reading it, I was just inwardly cheering you on. I'm like, I just pray that she just makes it to safety somehow. And I want to see, how does she do that? I was also very frustrated by the people who were around who could have helped you, and for reasons that you're going to be telling us about today, did not. So now that I have shared, I'm very happy that you're here, that you can share all of this with us, but so that we can give the audience a little bit of background, tell us what your book is about, and why did you feel that sharing your story and perspective would be a huge risk?
Sure. So my book is about my life, as you sort of alluded to there. So I think that, what you were talking about of being able to talk about all of the dirty laundry that is supposed to be kept secret. It's aib. It's you have to protect the honor, or you don't want to insult the Arab culture or the Muslim religion, or certainly not your family. So you have to keep all of these things hidden and keep all of these things secret. But I think the fact that I was born in Canada, like you identified, put me in a unique position because I had one foot very firmly planted in the Arab culture and Muslim religion, and the other foot was very firmly planted in the West, in Western culture. And so I kind of was looking at both civilizations objectively. I never really felt fully that I was Egyptian or Arab. My father's from Palestine. And I never felt that I was fully Canadian either. So I always felt like an outsider for both parts of my identity. And so I grew up kind of in that dichotomy, in a very, very extremist family, which at the time I didn't realize was so extremist, because everybody at the Islamic school, everybody in my community, everybody that we knew were all at the same level of extremism. So now in France, they're calling it separatist societies. So we lived parallel to the rest of the Canadian society, but we certainly did not live, we were not integrated into the culture. We only interacted with other Muslim people. Whatever business we needed, we found Muslim business owners. Like I mentioned, I was going to Islamic schools. You didn't interact with non-Muslims unless you absolutely had to, and you certainly didn't befriend them. So that was my childhood. And when I was 19, a couple of things happened, which I outlined in my book, but essentially my family felt that I was difficult to control. I was a model child, but the fact that I asked questions, I was a critical thinker, and I would push. Um, I didn't understand why we were supposed to be okay with, and in fact revere, a man who at 53 years old married a 6-year-old girl. I wasn't placated by my mother telling me, no, 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 that's okay. He didn't have sex with her until she was 9. Like, this is not helping, like, I'm a little girl myself, and it was terrifying for me to be having these conversations. And so that's why I was forced into a marriage with a member of Al Qaeda, because, as my mom put it, we needed to find you a man that was strong enough to control you. So they chose a terrorist. And I wasn't married to him for very long before I had a daughter. And once I had a daughter, that's when I felt like, okay, there's no way I'm responsible for this little life, and there's no way that I'm going to let her live the same life I had lived. In fact, it would have been a life even worse than I had lived, because he was talking about getting female genital mutilation, taking her to have that done to her. He was talking about going to live in Peshawar to continue fighting with Al Qaeda and taking her there. So I found the courage to get away from him because I was getting my daughter away from him. And I didn't say a word. You asked me what made me write my book, what made me say anything. I was scared, silent, for many, many years. First of all, I didn't even leave the house until I found out he was in prison in Egypt. And then I felt like, okay, now I can leave the house. I can go to university. I can start my life. But even then, I was very scared, because Al Qaeda is a very big network, and I didn't know, where his friends were, and if he was going to send them after me, or our daughter, even worse. And I stayed quiet for a very, very long time. And it wasn't until 2014 when there was an episode of Bill Maher, so Real Time with Bill Maher. He had a neuroscientist on his show, a man named Sam Harris. And he also had Ben Affleck, who was promoting his new movie, Batman. And Sam was there to promote a book that he had written called Islam and the Future of Tolerance, who he had written with a Muslim man from the UK named Majid Nawaz. And that book was all about basically progress, reform, the future of Islam, how it can somehow be, how it can live in this century in a harmonious way. And so Bill Maher and Sam Harris were discussing the book. And while discussing the book, they identified that in Egypt, which is where my family is from, 86% of people believed that those who denounce Islam should be executed. Now, it's already in the laws of about 15 Muslim majority countries for people to be executed. But in Egypt, you're not executed, you're just imprisoned. But close to 90% of Egyptians felt like we should be killed. And up until that moment, I had never really even considered speaking up or fighting for myself. But watching Sam Harris and Bill Maher talk about essentially me, because I'm from an Egyptian background and I denounced Islam. So the fact that they felt that that was important enough for them to talk about on HBO, like I just thought, yeah, that's right. Why don't I care? Why am I staying quiet? Why am I just accepting that this is the reality? We should be fighting back. We should be speaking up against this. It is wrong. And of course, Ben Affleck at that point jumped up and he started to call them racist and bigots. And the next day, my Facebook was covered with people that were supporting Ben Affleck. They were all saying, oh, that's so good that Ben Affleck was there to shut down these gross and racist men. And all of their, responses about Sam and Bill were basically saying, these are white American men. They have no right to be making these criticisms. That was the problem. The problem wasn't the content of what they were saying. The problem was their immutable characteristics. And so really at that moment, I felt like, okay, so I'll be a brown Arab woman and I'm going to say the exact same thing as these men. And then you're going to be forced to engage with the argument. You'll be forced to engage with the fact that people are executed around this world for being gay or for denouncing Islam. And this is something that as liberals, we should be concerned about. We should be speaking out against. And so that's why I started to write my book. Initially, the plan was to write it anonymously and to stay quiet because I was afraid for my life. But then what ended up happening was I was posting chapters on Tumblr, like as a blog, and I got bombarded by messages from people all over the world telling me their stories, sharing their experiences, and telling me how lucky I am to be in the West and the fact that I could be their voice. And so then I felt shame. I felt so ashamed that I was in a position to speak and I was too scared to do so. I was going to do it anonymously. I felt at that point, I have to have the courage. As you said right before we started this conversation, it was my responsibility. I felt compelled to speak up because I know that there are millions of people who cannot, literally cannot. They will be, if not executed by the state, they will be killed by vigilantes like they are in Pakistan and in Jordan and in Bangladesh. And so that's why I started to speak out. So I think that was a very long answer to your question.
And you actually answered a couple of the questions that I had wanted to ask you about the incident that stirred you to kind of like, no, I have to speak up. And I think what attracted me to your story, because as you know, I had recently experienced something that I hadn't in like 17 years, where there was a book talk that I was supposed to do that was canceled because of the woman in the book wanting to make a choice about the hijab. And what surprised me about that when that happened, it was because like, wait a minute, but like my Muslim friends and my the Muslim women involved in this project are all for it, and we're all like so happy that we're creating something wonderful, and you're shutting me down. Well, first there was two parts to that. The fact that the group that was shutting it down was like, well, we're shut down in the Middle East as women not to speak. And my father specifically left Iraq, brought us here because he had a lot of daughters. He had 7 girls and 4 boys, and he wanted everybody to, both his sons and his daughters, but he knew that his daughters would especially have a better future in the West. So I thought, well, we were shut down there, and then we come here and you're shutting us down. That was one. The other part was that I thought that the people, like the non-Muslims or that were participating in that, were not recognizing how damaging that is for
Mhm.
somebody who, like myself, went through a lot of trauma to in order to kind of like, I had so many Westerners actually are the ones that worked with me to help me as a writer find my voice. And then I thought, and what this did is it's like, I think we, including myself, have been fair to the voices of all the women in the Middle East, Christian, Jewish, Muslims, non-Muslims, whoever they are. They have all unique experiences. This is why was it's not that you're saying your experience is every experience or not, but you deserve to have a platform and to be heard. And i and um it, it was that incident that really made me see kind of a, almost, I felt like, is there like a lie behind this? We're saying on one hand there's no oppression, but then we're saying we can't express when especially if a woman is making a choice on something such as a clothing, we can't bring that to surface. um Having these conversations, these uncomfortable conversations, and facing these truths are vital for our growth and evolvement. And
Mhm.
it looks like you realize and like I said, especially for women, like if we're not going to do that here in the West, where can we do that? You said in your book, you write that your story is not politically correct,
Mhm.
and that that this how that politically incorrect narrative has created a double burden on you as a woman and free thinker. And this is kind of what I was addressing. It's like, on one hand, I mean, so we as women, and then we are minorities, but we have what we fit into the white, we're like white, but then in my case, because I'm Christian, I'm privileged. And in your case, so I'm privileged despite all these, all the wars and the traumas and everything that we went through.
Well, let's talk about how Christian people are not only persecuted but executed, and all over the Middle East. How the numbers of Christians in the Middle East are dwindling by the day. How there was a mosque, or sorry, a church in Egypt where close to 300 Christian people who were worshiping on Easter were all murdered. That doesn't sound very privileged to me.
Yeah, and this is why, like, you're saying, so your story, because it doesn't fall into that political correctness, how has that caused so much burden on you living in the West?
Well, it has put me in a position. So sort of what you identified there with the women from the Middle East, when they want to talk about these issues, they can't, because they're completely silenced by the societies around them. And so when you think theoretically, well, in the West, especially, America, the home of free speech and the First Amendment, like that's where you're going to be able to tell your story. That's where you're going to be able to talk about these issues. And then you find, lo and behold, that the society is also shutting you down here. So in a Muslim majority country, they will say this is blasphemous, so you have to be quiet. And then in a Western country, they'll tell you this is Islamophobic, so you have to be quiet. So women who are feeling that they want to express their traumas, they want to overcome, they're feeling squeezed from both sides. And, I had mentioned in the beginning how I had one foot in this culture and one foot in that culture. Both of those cultures were silencing me. Both sides didn't want to hear what I had to say. And that's why I stayed silent for so long, to be honest, because there was no point in talking. Who's going to listen? Who's going to understand? Even my husband at the time, now, of course, he knows everything, but, we had gotten married, and I hadn't shared with him anything to do with my background, because I felt like it's so irrelevant now. I have to just move forward and ignore it and just bury it somewhere in my psyche. And of course, that's an incredibly bad choice. It never stays buried, it always bubbles up. But that's kind of how I was thinking of it. Like, nobody cares. So I have to just keep quiet. And that is why I feel so grateful that I was able to write this book, because overwhelmingly, those are the messages that I get from women all over the world. And the message is, I didn't feel like I had any anybody who would understand or anybody who would care, and so I just put up with it. You know, you get to a point where you submit. Ayaan Hirsi Ali was in a podcast with Joe Rogan, and she talked about how when she was, you know, in her preteens, that the women around her started telling her, stop fighting. Because, you know, in your preteens is when you start to ask a lot of questions, you start to get nervous about this marriage thing that they're going to push on you. They start putting the hijab on you. It's a time of a lot of change. And that's when the women around her, out of kindness, out of them being, empathetic towards her, they said, stop fighting, stop asking questions, just accept it. You're never you're never going to be able to get this la la land life that you want. So just accept that this is the way it is. And when you stop fighting, then you'll be happy. And that is exactly the same message that I got, and exactly the same message that countless women around the world got. And that's what we do. So you fight, flight, or freeze. You know, most of us just froze. And that's when I ended up forced into that marriage, I froze. I was forced into it, and I married him, and I had a baby with him. And you just do what you are being forced to do, because you don't feel like there's any way out.
But
You don't
Yasmin,
feel like you can fight.
but there was an incident before that, was it, I believe, in
Mhm.
high school, when there was a
Mhm.
chance for
Mhm.
you to kind of break out of that abuse system, the abusive house that you were in. Um, can you share what happened in that incident? Because that part was really, that's the part that I think myself and a lot of readers were just like, this is so wrong in so many ways.
Yeah. So that was exactly, I felt like, okay, so my Muslim and Arab side, they keep on pushing me to be somebody who I don't want to be. And there's all sorts of normalized abuse. You talked about how you're not supposed to talk about things. You have to be quiet about the abuse, because then it's shameful to your family if you mention it. Um, and so I reached out to my other side, which was my Canadian side. And that was my first year in a school that was not an Islamic school. And I reached out to actually, he reached out to me. My drama teacher came up to me and he asked me if everything was okay, because he saw that I was in a dark place. And I told him about all of the abuse that was going on at home. Um, and he notified the police, and the police notified social services. And it was this big, huge investigation. And there was a court case. Many times we had to go to court. And in the end, the judge said to me, basically, he said, this is your culture. This is your background. This is the way your family chooses to discipline you. And so he wasn't going to protect me. And that felt like the nail in the coffin for me. I don't think I even realized at that point how betrayed I felt. I mean, I was like 12 or 13 years old. I felt like there was nothing left to live for. There was nothing, there was no, nothing, there was no way I was going to fight. It's like I was just constrained from everywhere. So if my own, this Canadian society that I thought would protect me also turned their back on me. So there was nothing, where was I going to fight? A
Yeah,
child of
where are
that
you going to
age,
go
what
next?
am I going to do? Yeah. So that was the first time um, I hit a very dark depression, and I tried to commit suicide, which I was also terrified of because committing suicide is haram. So I was like scared to die because then I would be punished eternally, but also I wanted to die. So I was like, it was just it was a very dark place in my life that I kept returning to, you know, whenever I would feel um, like fighting, it's like my brain reminded me, oh, no, 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 there's no point. Just submit, because nothing's going to come of fighting. So don't bother. And so that's how I ended up marrying this guy.
Right. This is why it just kept continuing on and on. And, honestly, like, a person would have to read the book to see the details. We're just really put it in a nutshell, the story, but you were in an abusive situation from very early on, since age 6, and it just continued until you found a way to escape the situation. You were brave enough to find your way and transformed your life, and are living totally opposite of what you'd experienced. And as a result, you have become an activist that to help other people who are in that situation. But in that work, everything that we do, I mean, this was your experience. So people could say, well, this was your experience, and this is not everybody's incidence. This could happen in any home. It could be happening in a Christian home, in a Jewish home, atheist home. It doesn't matter. Abuse doesn't have any religion or race or ethnicity. It could exist anywhere. But yet, because of the way that you're sharing your story, or that your activism is, what it's doing is demonizing an entire religion and region, and bringing hate and stereotype to its people. I know that on social media you're very active, and I know that you respond to all of these different accusations and criticism. How do you respond to something like this comment?
I had a long podcast with Sam Harris where it was essentially just answering that one question. And really what it comes down to is it is important to criticize these things that are being they're being protected. So the Quran in chapter 4, verse 34 instructs men, if you fear arrogance or disobedience from your wives, beat them. So because the Quran says that, what ends up happening is that in Egypt, for example, very recently, there was a huge push to make domestic violence a criminal offense. And that push failed. And the reason why it failed is because the clerics and also many Muslim men came forward and said, the Quran gives us the right to beat our wives. And so you cannot make something a criminal offense when Allah has made it permissible. So when I identify Islam in these issues, it is important to identify the root reason why these issues persist and why it is difficult for women in Muslim majority countries to attain feminism and progress, why it's difficult for them to push forward. When they talk about the age of marriage, then you always have the argument, oh, but our prophet married a child of this age. And so then how can you go ahead and say, oh no, she has to be 18? It goes on and on and on. So Again, FGM that I mentioned earlier, female genital mutilation. If you want to educate people and say, you shouldn't do this to your daughters, well, they're going to refer back to the hadith and say, well, this is what it says in our religion. And so it is important to criticize the religion because I want to dismantle these violent, misogynist practices that hurt women, that hurt me. And so I understand what it's like to be hurt by these patriarchal structures. And you cannot just talk about problems without talking about the root of the problems. You have to be able to criticize things, and that's how progress happens. And with Judaism and with Christianity, that's how progress happened. That's how Reform Judaism came about. That's what the New Testament is about. This is why when you go to a church now, you can find a rainbow flag on the door. That didn't happen on its own. That happened because Christian people were criticizing their own scriptures. Now, I'm not a Muslim, and it's not my place to reform the religion, but I do stand side by side in support of many Muslims who do that. One of them I just mentioned, Majid Nawaz from the Quilliam Foundation. He wrote that book with Sam Harris, Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Zuhdi Jasser is another American. There are people all over the world. I'm not just in the West, but like in Kuwait and in Egypt and everywhere, who are trying to criticize these violent aspects of the religion that need to be reformed. And that's the only way we're going to move forward. If we keep on like a rubber band going back to 1400-year-old archaic edicts, then it's impossible for a culture to progress.
What I think too, Yasmine, so I'll speak like in my case and my family. I was mentioning to you that myself and my husband, I grew up in a Muslim country. I loved my neighbors. My best friend was a Muslim. Her mom treated me like her daughter. And we saw some things there, but like, again, as you would see anywhere, like when I came here, my husband has such loyal friends that are like from childhood that their connection is just through the phone, but their loyalty is so strong. And so it seems like, I think that maybe, I don't know if it's a fear or confusion or respect. I don't know what it is. And this is also, I'm really sincerely trying to understand this, because we come from the same land. We all whatever our origin is. And this is an important conversation because we're still experiencing, like, there is a very still small group of Christians in Iraq. And we grew up with Muslims. That's a reality. And we also inherited a lot of cultural things from that, a lot of good cultural things, including like some of the family dynamics. And for me, for years, I've tried to highlight that because that's my favorite part and memories of those areas. And I just kind of don't want to, I feel like it might, if we just continue to just focus on the negativities. However, until, like, for instance, when that book cancellation happened, I'm like, well, can we look away from that? Is it good for us? Maybe it's not the good thing. Plus, aside from being contacted individually to say, hey, look, like, I'm glad that you're highlighting this group of women, but we're here too, and our voice deserves it as well. So my question is, like, maybe what is the fine line between that you can have a people and a group that you love and you are friends with and get into a decent conversation, as with other religions, like you said, have done and still do. Like, nobody will get upset, like, if Christianity is criticized and we have conversations about that and everybody just walks away like nothing happened. From your observation, given your activism work and everything, how is it that people view criticism as hate or bigotry? How did we get to this point in a country, in Western countries, that support the First Amendment? freedom of speech. I mean, this is so important. And by the way, I want to say how important freedom of speech. So my father was punished, okay, not physically, but he was, um, they took he had a very good job, and they relocated him very far away from his family, because he, when the Ba'ath Party first came, he
Mm.
criticized it. He, nothing else. Like, he didn't, there was no violence, there was nothing. And in return, okay, your job is going to be hundreds of miles away, and so you can't see your family regularly. And he suffered, and his spirit was broken because of that. So people don't understand the value of the First Amendment, the value of really speaking your truth and being able to have a decent conversation, a decent, peaceful conversation, in order to avoid this kind of, that punishment just, it broke his spirit. And that was, it's a different type of passive violence.
Mm. Yeah. So I think sort of to expand on that is you have a personal experience with how not upholding the value of freedom of speech, how dangerous that can be and how toxic that can be to a society. So you recognize the value of freedom of speech sort of at a visceral level that other people may not, who have always lived in a free country and who have always been able to speak freely. And so they don't recognize the value of their First Amendment as much as other people. So in that same vein, if you continue it, that's sort of why I'm speaking out against the things that I'm speaking out, is because I lived as a Muslim woman for most of my life. So when I'm speaking up against these issues, it's not because I hate Muslim women. It's it's because I care about them and I understand what they're going through because I have lived the same thing. So somebody else looking outside in isn't going to understand our experiences the way we do because we've lived through it. So we understand at a visceral level and we feel sort of connected by our shared trauma. And so I have a series on YouTube called Forgotten Feminists, where I invite women to talk about their experiences and how they've overcome. And I had one woman named Reem, who is a pediatric surgeon from Oman. And the topic came to hijab, and we had two hijabis who were that's women who wear hijab, who were discussing this with us, because in my Forgotten Feminist conversations, we open it up to discussion. And it was so surprising for people to see that there were hijabi women agreeing with non-hijabi women, and that we have shared experiences and they understand the what we're talking about because they have also experienced it, but we make different decisions. And so just to really quickly tell you, there was one woman there who was saying that she didn't used to wear hijab, but she really loved volleyball and she wanted to coach a girls' volleyball team. But that meant that she would have to take these girls on trips, on, international trips sometimes, to go and play against other volleyball teams. But people wouldn't trust her with their daughters because she didn't have a cloth on her head. So she put the cloth on her head so that the families of these girls could view her as a trustworthy person, which is, of course, ludicrous because she's exactly the same person, the same mind, the same heart, the same soul. The difference is there's a cloth on her head. It didn't change her personality. But it was what was needed in order for these families to trust her with their daughters. And so she did it. She did it because she felt like, I love volleyball and it is my passion and I want to pass on that passion to these girls because, it's very rare. I mean, if she didn't do it, it wouldn't happen. These girls wouldn't have an opportunity to play volleyball. And so it was a decision that she made. It was a choice that she made. When I decided that I didn't want to wear hijab anymore, my mother threatened to kill me. So we all make decisions, we all make choices, and we deal with the consequences of our actions. But I was born and raised in a Muslim family. I lived in a Muslim family I lived as a Muslim most of my life. So of course my experiences are going to be the same as, similar to other Muslim women around the world. So it's really strange to me when people start to say to me, well, the fact that you're criticizing women getting their genitals cut, or women being thrown in prison over a piece of cloth on their head, or the fact that you're criticizing young girls being forced into marriages, or the fact that you're criticizing any of these, issues that force women into subordinate roles in these societies, is because you hate them. It doesn't make any sense. Like, of course I don't hate Muslim people, and I especially don't hate Muslim women. Otherwise I wouldn't bother. I would just go about my life. I'm a free woman. I've been a free woman for a long time. I have a wonderful husband. I have a great job. I have a wonderful life. I wouldn't need to speak out against any of this stuff.
You're not doing this for the sake of stirring up like a type of, you're helping women make their choices and to
absolutely, because I know what it feels like to be in their position. And I cannot tell you how many messages I get from Muslim women who are talking to me about things that, this, having grown up in the Middle East, things they can't talk to their friends. They can't talk to their family.
I always get like, so I don't get as many people writing messages on my pages up front, but then I'll get all these private messages. Well, I feel this about this, and can you help me with that? And so I know, and I respect that. Like, whatever way I could be there to have that conversation, I'm fine with it. But that brings us to something regarding the hijab. I do have somebody here that mentioned that question, and I have it also in my list of questions. And it's something that critics have mentioned about your story and your view of the hijab. It seems like, in their opinion, it's one-sided, contradicting your belief in freedom and not allowing for reconciliation between the two worlds. How do you respond to that? That you support the choices and freedom for women, but then at the same time you kind of are against them making that choice, kind of.
I'm not against them making the choice. I'm against the hijab. I'm against the purpose for the hijab. I'm against the victim blaming. I'm against modesty culture. I'm against, slut shaming. I'm against women being imprisoned over hijab. I'm against girls being killed over hijab. I'm against the abuse and the overwhelming obstacles women have to face if they make a decision based, about what they want to put on their own bodies. That's what I'm against.
Okay.
And so when you talk about being one-sided, it's just laughable because, we have something called No Hijab Day, which is something that is observed in 140 different countries. The people who started No Hijab Day are speaking in Parliament and in Senate. They have corporations like American Airlines sponsoring them. There is so much money and support and propaganda for the hijab. I mean, Barbie even wears a hijab. Nike puts their swoosh on a hijab. We're talking about one-sided. I'm little old me. I'm little old, Yasmine Mohammed. That's all I am. I'm one individual. I have a hashtag, free from hijab, No Hijab Day. That's what I have. And I'm being criticized because I'm trying to show the other side of the story. That's all I'm saying, is I'm saying, sure, there are women that choose to wear the hijab, and there are women that are happy wearing the hijab. But let's look over here. Let's look over here at these toddlers, Instagram accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers for toddlers 2 and 3 years old in niqab. Okay, are you going to tell me that toddler made the choice to wear that niqab? We're going to pretend that it's a choice. Okay, that's what I'm speaking out against. I'm speaking out against the lie that this is a choice. I know it wasn't a choice. Every single girl in Iran who was forced to wear the hijab, otherwise she wouldn't be allowed to go to school, knows it's not a choice. Every single young girl in Afghanistan right now who could be, kidnapped by her government if she doesn't wear hijab, knows that it's not a choice. Every single girl in Saudi Arabia knows it's not a choice. Everybody knows that for millions and millions of girls and women across this planet, it is not a choice. But shame on me for saying that. That makes me a bad person, that I'm just trying to show that there's a different perspective. Suddenly I'm the one who's one-sided. We already know the other side. We've been hearing about the other side over and over and over again because of the Islamist propaganda. We saw the other side in the Women's March. In the Women's March, when they held up posters of a woman wearing a hijab that was made out of an American flag. We see the hijab. We see it in the Spider-Man movies. We see it in every advertisement. We see it on the cover of magazines. We already have that side. So when I'm trying to talk about this side, that makes me one-sided. It's absolutely so perplexing.
When I'm hearing your frustration, and it reminds me of many of the men and women who feel that here in the West, we're always depending on the political climate. We either have to be victims, or we have to be terrorists, or we have to be this, or there's categories for us, and anything outside of that is so uncomfortable, and you cannot get your story through. And that's where the frustration, because through my whole entire career of trying to tell stories that are authentic to me, that's what I've experienced. Well, it doesn't fit into the Muslim category, and it doesn't fit into this category, and it doesn't fit. And it's always because there's a certain definement that others have for us, and that's where they want us. And that's what oppression really is. It's putting you in this box and describing you and just feeling comfortable if you just stay there. And that could happen again, like going back, that it happens in various ways, which brings us, this has been so interesting. Like I'm learning so much, and for me, people have to realize that people from Middle Easterners, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Coptics, Muslims, whatever your Jews, whatever your background, we would have such a more, one day, I hope, possibly this more peaceful area if we could communicate this. Because I think that when you don't communicate, it comes out in different forms, and the violence continues, and most people who are living in those regions don't want to live under these kind of unpeaceful circumstances. They want peace. One of the major ways for peace is to have these conversations so that we don't end up killing each other, right? So that we don't feel like we have to be forced out of a certain land that we love, or leave people that we love. But this brings us to this question that I think also, which gets a lot more attention, the other things, the more minor things that are happening than the fact that there are women that get hurt, or the fact that there are a lot of Muslim men and women who really want genuine peace for the Middle East, and they're not being listened to either. Whether they're not discussing religion or not, I don't hear them. I know who they are, but we don't really get to hear them. So you write about young Western women that, with no legitimate problems to overcome, they invented problems so they could fulfill their desire to solve them. Can you give examples of what legitimate versus illegitimate problems would be, and what consequences inventing problems can have on our society?
So I think in the context of that quote, what I was saying was that feminism is established in the West. The women that came before us, 100 years ago, pushed for women's progress in the West. And now for a woman to demand, equal pay or anything is not far-fetched. It is accepted. It is supported. Whereas if you would look at, say, for example, women's rights conferences in Pakistan, it's all men that are sitting on the panel, or in Saudi Arabia or wherever, right? It's all men sitting on the panel. So women being treated as equals is, we may be on the fourth wave of feminism here in the West, but there's still, the ripples of the first wave are still yet to hit some other countries around the world. And so what I was saying in that quote was that if these feminists are looking for a fight, there are fights. The fights exist. You don't have to look for the minutia here in the West and say, oh, well, let's talk about man spreading, let's identify, the most minutia situations, the microaggressions, they call it. When you have like, why are we talking about molehills? You have a massive mountain over here. If you want to fight, here's a big fight waiting for you. Masih Alinejad, who is a huge campaigner for the rights of women in Iran, mind-boggling. You'd think that this was created in a film studio. She has a picture side by side of a still from The Handmaid's Tale, where the women are wearing red robes and white bonnets. And she has that side by side with a picture from a school in Iran where the girls are wearing red dresses and white hijab, and they're being punished because their hijabs aren't being put on properly. Meanwhile, the other video, there is a handmaid being punished for one reason or another. And she's basically expressing that same idea, which is, this is not fiction. When The Handmaid's Tale came out, everybody said, well, this is what America looks like. This is what the Christians want to do in America. This is going to be Trump's America. We don't have to sort of imagine these things. They exist. This is happening, So that's what I was saying there is it hurts. It is a betrayal. I can't tell you how much it hurts to see feminists not raising their hands out in, extending support to feminists all over the world who are looking for one fraction of the freedom that they don't even know are freedoms. In Iran, you can be imprisoned for riding a bike. Who thinks of riding a bike as a freedom? But instead of reaching out their hands in support of these women who are literally killing themselves for the most basic freedoms, they stand on, well, they have two things that they do. Either they ignore them completely and pretend it's not happening, in which case that's fine. Ignore them. Pay attention to your own problems. I respect that. You don't need to get involved in everybody's business. That's fine. But who I don't respect are the ones who actively work against these women that are fighting for their freedoms. So you'll find free, powerful women like politicians coming from Sweden, which is probably the most, gender equitable country in the world. Well, probably, Iceland. And they will put a hijab on when they go to Iran, and they will, respect the gender segregation laws. Same thing with, American leaders all the time doing that, and Canadian, all sorts of supposed free women who, at that point, they have the choice of doing the right thing and not supporting a tool of subjugation that they would never support for themselves, for their daughters, for their sisters, for their mothers, but they're happy to support it for these random women, that they don't care about.
Yeah, it does. It feels like our voices are so dismissed, right? And there's, again, for whatever the reason may be, certain voices will be given the microphone if it fits a certain agenda, and then certain don't. And so that is why your voice is so important, so that we can see that there are many different voices and many different women that are that come from the Middle East, and there's many different beliefs, and we have to honor all of them, because that's that's what a healthy system and a healthy culture is. And I want to tell you, you have a lot of very positive messages that I'm reading here. People that are really cheering you on, Dr. Kamal Abdul Malik and Muntaha Mekani, I think, is one of your biggest fans, it seems like, on here. So you have a lot of people that are supporting you, and that makes me happy, because we want to hear these voices. There are a lot of people that want to listen, and we can do that in a very peaceful way. And thank you for having the courage, Yasmine, to write a book, to be active, about this, trying to help so many women. Any last words? We've done more than the half hour, because there's no way I was gonna condense this, because it's very rare, and I think it's part of it. This includes for myself. We have learned how to not speak about these things. We let them come through our heads and try to understand them on our own, maybe journal about them. Maybe for me as a writer, I have found some kind of a release, but still not enough to where when I was reading your book, I was like, oh my goodness, she's being, like, this is just so naked to me. And I wanted to see that nakedness, because it all of a sudden felt okay. Like, oh, okay, well, she said it and I feel it too. And hey, that's a good thing, So any last message before we go?
Yeah, no, I think that what you said is great. And sunshine disinfects, lift up the rug and all of that dirt that we've been shoveling under there, let it out, let it clean it up, and so I'm really happy to hear you say that. So I'm glad that I've inspired you to feel like it's okay to talk about these things. And yeah, so I just wanted to let your listeners know that I have an organization called Free Hearts, Free Minds. So if they want to check that out, click on testimonials. You can hear from some people that we have helped, and then also click on the donate button too if you are so moved. And I also have a series called Forgotten Feminists, where I speak to different women from around the world about their own personal experiences and how they've overcome. And then, of course, there's my book, Unveiled. So hopefully people will keep in touch by going to yasminemohammed.com.
Thank you, Yasmine. Keep roaring on social media too. I love watching that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.